Hi there, Dave Dobbs here, aka David Field. So I thought I'd make a new video because we've got this 100-day point in Nibiru cycle coming up on, ironically, the 1st of May, which is 100 days from basically the last sighting, which was the 21st of January 2017, this year. And so, I don't know if you remember, I think it was on the 29th of January, February, on 29th of March 2016, last year, Becky Lewis caught Nibiru 100 days exactly after her previous shot, which was on the 24th of December 2015. Just the year before. So that was exactly 100 days, and I just made a video just before that time, and I thought I'd do the same now, just before that 100-day point, just to put it out there to say that you can expect to see that. I mean, I'm in preparation of this video now, and quite likely it could come, and it sounds like it has come a little bit earlier. And the reason for that is primarily because it's that much further away from the sun. And as it, we've been seeing it, it's been popping into sight every 200 days, which, it takes 200 days to go round Nemesis. And so there's only one point in that cycle where it's far enough away from the sun that we get to see it every 200 days, especially as it's, I'm talking about as we've been seeing it, as it's been going over the top of the sun from well, not really from our perspective, but from, if you were looking at the whole kind of the solar system and the ecliptic plane and all the planets going around the ecliptic plane, you can imagine it going over the top. And then you've got Nibiru sort of following it behind, but it's orbiting it, and obviously it's in its orbit around Nemesis. It goes to a point in each cycle where it's at the furthest point from our own sun, and at that point, that's when we, after sunset or before sunrise, when it's in the right position, we get to see the tail catching the sun's, basically illuminated by the sun's, by the photons hitting the tail of Nibiru. So that's why we don't see Nibiru so much. We more see the tail of Nibiru being illuminated by those by this process, the same process that illuminates our atmosphere, and as a result of photon bombardment. Now, as the whole system is now moving away from the sun, like on the 29th of March 2016, where we suddenly had this 100-day view of it, and that was because I'm of an opinion that demonstrated that it was finally moving away from the sun. It was on its exit trajectory. We didn't quite know where Nemesis was at that stage. We're still trying to work out. You had the entrance point of Nemesis, this dwarf planet, Planet X, whatever you want to call it, as 2010. It was, I can't remember the exact date, late February 2010, and then almost exactly 2 weeks later, early March, around about March the 11th, I'm not too sure, but 2011, we had Fukushima, and those were the two bump points which basically told us the speed. It was the overall speed that Nemesis was moving, and the fundamental trajectory that it was coming into the sun, moving towards the sun on. We didn't know whether it was, like I say, whether it was going to sort of like how it was going to move through our solar system. All we knew was that all those 2012ers were absolutely right. This thing had arrived on the hour, really into the central hub of our solar system for 2012 sharp, and we've just been marvelling at all the various shots of it. But obviously, very, very difficult to see because you you just can't see anything that close to the sun. What happens with the moon? It just disappears as it gets closer and closer to the sun. Anything else does the same. So we can't see it unless a part of it pops out far enough away from the sun, and that is, obviously we do see we've got tens of thousands of corroborated testimonies of photos and videos of Nemesis, all of which we just can't believe. Many of them from webcams and stuff like that. You can't fabricate, you can't make up, but we literally can't believe it. We all can't believe it. Obviously, a lot of people have now caught onto this, but it's just too big and no one knows how to get around it. And then we have this sighting that comes in, like I say, every 200 days, which is now turned into an every 100-day occurrence. And whilst we were closest to it, in kind of like round about, the big bump point last year was on November the 22nd. So this was the first bump point of the 2 bump points I'm assuming that we're going to have as it goes out. November the 22nd, you remember the big earthquake in New Zealand and the big earthquake in it was in Fukushima again, actually, ironically. And there's been huge, great tremors, but those two big earthquakes, just from a seismic sort of activity perspective, I would say that marks that, because that was the biggest point in those earthquakes. I would say that marks the first bump point of its exit. So we know that it comes 1 year and 2 weeks later, because that demonstrates the kind of speed, the overall speed that Nemesis is moving. Although we also have to understand that this next bump point could be a little bit earlier than expected, because the escape velocity of the dwarf planet X system, whatever you want to call it, will have no doubt increased a little bit because of its kind of final movement into the sun and then being shot out the other side. I can imagine its acceleration is just only increasing at the moment, and so it's travelling very slowly. It's travelling far slower than Earth. You think how far it moved. It moved as far as Earth moves in 2 weeks in 1 year, in terms of between 2010 and 2011. So we're still not. It won't have increased massively, but from there it's already reached pretty much its maximum velocity, no doubt. But no doubt we just don't know. We'll just have to see. We just don't guess. It's going to be 2 weeks, and it's going to be 2 weeks after the 22nd of November this year. And maybe a bit less. And obviously, it's going to be a build-up as we get close to it as well. And that is what's also happening on the 22nd of. It's going to be around about the 22nd of May. We are going to be directly on the far side. In my opinion, we are going to be on the far side of Nemesis, on the far side of the sun to Nemesis, rather. And I don't know how to really explain that dynamic scientifically. I'm a surfer. If I'm honest, I'm a surfer, and I always like to know when the highest waves are. And I'm not a good surfer. I've got to be honest. I'm a crap surfer. The first time I ever surfed, I literally ended up virtually killing myself. Well, I had to be dragged out of the Pacific by a lifeguard, because I'd gone in without the leash on my to my surfboard. I'd never surfed before, and I got battered by the surfboard. Went out on a red flag on Bondi Beach, very silly. And anyway, I do like to know when the sort of high tides are, and that's what I'm always curious about, this information. And one of the things you notice about a high tide is that the moon hasn't changed its distance to Earth at the point of the highest tide, that comes at the point of when the moon is fullest. And if you look at that point where, say, it's neap and it's right between the two, and you get the half moon, and we get the least amount of tidal activities, the distance between the moon and the Earth at that point, and at the point when it's full, or when it's like a new moon or a dark moon, it's consistent. I mean, there are minor variations, but not enough to sort of warrant the type of water displacement that we see. And so, what is the dynamic that's changed at the point of a full moon or a dark moon? You know, that is so, or black moon, or whatever, that is so. That causes the high tides that we see, and of course it's the alignment with the sun, and so it's the sun, you could argue, that is actually causing the high tides. It's this big alignment that occurs at this point, and so when we get these big alignments, I see it like almost like a shopping bag. You know, suddenly you're just putting more stuff in the shopping bag, and the shopping bag is so much heavier, and because everything's so much heavier, it kind of puts so much more weight. I don't know if I'm correct here. You know, to me, this is the nearest and most truest evidence that we have of torsion fields, when we actually cut through that specific point, and we get these strange anomalies as we lead up to this direct alignment point. Is it evidence of a torsion field? I think gravity is still so poorly understood, and so, you know, there's lots of theories out there, but nonetheless, we are going to come into this alignment point on the 22nd of May, and I don't see it as major Earth changes to the effect that we'll probably get sort of like what would be effectively 6 months and 1 week later. I don't know the effects. I mean, you saw what happened last year. There was quite a few earthquakes and what have you, but they weren't. I mean, there were a few quite big earthquakes, but I'm not thinking that anything's going to be too severe at this time. But we have to understand that there is going to be a marginal effect on the overall kind of like. There's going to be gravitational anomalies happening now, right up to the 22nd of May, and for about as long back as well, as we come into this kind of rise, as we cut through the alignment. But I don't think it's going to be. I think it's going to be not nearly as severe it was at the same time last year, because, like I say, we're on the far side of it. You know, we've got a while yet before we're coming into the sort of like to the next big sort of like area of close proximity. You know, it's and specifically, you know, as far as Nibiru, you know, I think I've done my maths on that enough for you there. You know, I think I'd much rather, for any big flybys, because I don't know how much closer it can get from that shot that we brought into the last video, the fist of God, as the Mexicans call it. I can't offer any better evidence than that, really. You know, that's the best I'm going to get, isn't it? You know, that's the best I'm going to get. You know, you put a date and a time on that and say that's exactly what you're going to see, or that day at that time. You struggle to better that in any way, shape or form. Not that I want to, it's just the fact that this thing is so obviously there, and you can see this. You know, a lot of people think that politics and Nibiru and all this sort of stuff don't mix, but unfortunately, you know, in the current situation, we're more likely to do a lot more damage to ourselves through the whole kind of political debacle that's going on at the moment than anything that Nibiru might do. You know, because we are bringing a lot of very, very powerful technology to the table and making a lot of big threats and putting a lot of crazy stuff out there, and we're, you know, to actually get to this point of dealing directly with Nemesis and the closest transit of Nibiru we're likely to get is it's going to be a challenge to get there. But ultimately, this is our world, and we have to make the choices that we're going to make. And so the irony is that we've got 3 elections now coming up. over this period when we're completely on the opposite side of the sun to this whole system. Ironically, the Brexit vote was on the 23rd of June, just when I said the last big, the big flyby before I said we'd have a flyby on the 25th of January 2017. Because we don't know, and this is only the viewing point of Nibiru. You understand? This is the point we see it when it's at this furthest point away from the sun. If this was to eclipse us, you understand that the closest point that we would be concerned about this, where we might get an eclipse, obviously because we're seeing it at the furthest point, you'd have to sort of like subtract 50 days or a quarter cycle to be in a position where this thing would eclipse. Its movements would be kind of, if you like, transverse to the movements of Earth. And you know, it would have to be coming basically from, as if appearing to be coming directly from the sun towards us, not if it carried on going and then came round behind us, so to speak, from the position of the sun, which is where we've been seeing it. So you also got, if you are gonna work this out and put a date on this, remember that, you know, we've been witnessing it at its furthest point, and to incorporate that into your maths. And I think you could find that you might know, if we're assuming that this point here, it's very, I mean, I think it's about 3-4 times further away from the moon than us here, even though it looks like it's kind of up in our atmosphere or something. This is out in space. The whole tail has been caught up by the sun. It's being illuminated. That's why we can see it at this strategic point. You know, how much closer can we get to that? Anyway, we've got 3 elections coming up. We've got the Seoul election, or the Korean, you know, the South Korean election. And of course, you know, that's a really, really big thing, because, you know, that's the way in which Russia and China are now going to put pressure on America and Britain in terms of Syria. You know, so there's big cogs moving there, and I don't think our media are really going to demonstrate just how big the odds are going to stack there as the pressure now gets ratcheted up. Then obviously we've got the election coming up in, well, we've got 3 days, the presidential elections in France, and I just thought I'd try and get this video in because I don't know the outcome of what that's going to be. And obviously then we've got, you know, about 2 weeks later or whatever, we've got the second set of elections that go with those elections, and I don't know enough about that process to comment too much on it really. But my girlfriend Virginia is kind of trying to keep me up to date on the whole thing, but I'm a little bit kind of like, I'm just watching that space now. We kind of had our big shout out, you know, about our process, and now the French are going through their process. And you know, if France does leave vote for someone like Le Pen, it's going to bring about obviously a FREXIT vote, a similar scenario that's happened in Britain, and that could lead to the separation of France also from the EU, and that could collapse the EU. And a lot of people are putting odds on that will collapse the EU. And if it collapses the EU, it's you know, they can't get us into a TPP or TTIP or whatever it's called, Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. They know they can't, especially with the European Court of Human Rights. And so what better than to try and break up the European Court of Human Rights? And of course, you know, kill multiple birds with one stone, break up the EU, break up the euro. And the biggest threat really to the US dollar right now, as much as anything else, is the euro. And Germany's just now gone and signed up with the AIIB. Britain's also signed up to a much smaller percentage, but this new kind of it's China's equivalent to the Fed, and so this is why India's gone through this massive. This is why I'm of an opinion that, you know, the kind of 500,000 rupee notes all got cancelled in India, and you know 96% of people in India don't use banks, so it's all in money. So when you're talking about cancelling that amount of money, you're pretty much cancelling the whole system, or a big, massive proportion of the system. So they're going through the big correction to bring us back into real value again, set against, you know, a new sort of gold standard, as I'm understanding it, and they're bringing real value back to the table, and that's like to a vampire to a currency like the US dollar, and the pound, and effectively the euro, except that Germany is in good state with China at the moment because of its investment in the AIIB, and same with Russia and the same with India. You know, there's a whole new system that's developing, which means that, you know, there's a big part of our economies that are sort of like going into a correction here, and realistically, either there's going to be a world war coming our way, or there's going to be a massive correction. We don't know which it's going to be. If the European Union doesn't collapse, and there's a big chance it won't. It was designed to withstand this, and I'm of a mind that the Theresa May signing Article 50 is illegal because she was an unelected leader, going against the original wishes of the Prime Minister who was elected, and considering that Nigel Farage was never had UK independence on the table at all. He was always secretly working with Donald Trump. Clearly, you know, this whole thing had been mapped out. This was not UK independence. This was breaking away from Europe, so we could do away with the human rights and become part of a much more capitalist program, a much more corporately identified capitalist program that you know, Trump's he's run a fascinating campaign. You know, he's been more than aware that all the big main media outlets are getting really low views, and have been, and he's utilised a lot of alternative media to get his message out there very cleverly. Alex Jones, it was, you know, I mean, Alex Jones has got his man in now, you know. Michael Rivero, what really happened? You know, I'm a great fan of Michael Rivero, and then he suddenly became a sort of like pro BREXIT fan, and a pro Trump fan, and now he's on his kind of like what really happened blog. He's got kind of like Trump as a swamp thing, so he's suddenly very rapidly changed sides again, very awkwardly, no doubt. And he's Michael Rivera is an amazingly intelligent man, and I've followed his blogs or his kind of news feed for many years, and I was heartbroken when he suddenly became pro-Brexit because he was missing the value of the European Court of Human Rights. He just was blind to it. He was believing all the media, and started believing that it was actually the EU that had orchestrated the invasion of Iraq, and it was EU that had orchestrated the whole invasion of Libya, and it was the EU that was behind everything that NATO has been driving, and suddenly and we all scapegoated the EU. It was why had the EU done? You know, they've really slowed down the process of war in so many times. You know, certainly we saw the stance that France took in the Iraq War in 2003. It's you know, and so we have this third election coming up now, which is Theresa May calling a snap election, and that's because, you know, we're told that that's because she's absolutely guaranteed a victory. But no, I'm not of that mind at all, because this might not go the way they plan, and if it doesn't go the way they plan, she would have signed Article 50, and she could have damaged our relationship with Europe. But if Marine Le Pen, or a candidate that's pro-Brexit, doesn't get in France, it could leave Britain very isolated. And and that's a very realistic scenario, you know. And you know, I just want you to look at this video here. That's a scene of Margaret Thatcher collapsing. It's 1982. You know, it was about 3 or 4 months. I forget all the dates here. You know what I mean? But loosely, you can research it a little bit. But it was a good 3 or 4 months after the Falklands War, and you see her legs collapsing underneath her because she'd gone into the Great Hall of the people in what was Peking. It was Beijing now, and she'd gone in there brazenly. She'd missed vital negotiations the day before, and because she just wanted to meet Deng Xiaoping, and she hadn't really realised that Deng Xiaoping wasn't the head of China. He was head of the party that runs China, the political party that runs China, and it's different. You know, he was more like a spiritual leader or something like that than a, you know, he maybe not the correct terminology actually for Deng Xiaoping, the patriot at the time, but maybe far from it actually. But he was the, you know, sits in a high position. He's the head of the party, not the country. You could argue the same thing, but the actual decisions of the country are made by those heads of state. They're the people you have to negotiate with. And she when that was approached, she was just along the lines, we'll deal with that tomorrow when I speak to Deng Xiaoping. And she kind of missed it. And by the time she turned up to meet Deng Xiaoping, it was all decided. It was over with. Hong Kong was going back to China, lock, stock and barrel. And of course, you know, in the original agreement, you know, the Chinese had basically stopped Britain fighting in, well, it was a 99-year lease, so it would have been 1898. In the lead up to that, you know, that they'd suddenly said, look, hey, why don't you just have Hong Kong forever? That's right, forever. And we'll stop fighting. We want to trade. You want to trade. You know, this just seems crazy. We're just going to go into war. It's not good for you. It's not good for us. You know, we're willing to let you have that forever. You'll stop fighting. And to sweeten the deal, we'll give you 10 times more land as well, which was the new territories, on a 99-year lease, just to keep you calm. And so, you know, we're all on the same side, blah, 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 blah. And of course, it completely and utterly destroyed Britain's war antics. You know, the Chinese more than knew how the British negotiated. So they found ways. They found ways around our kind of warring. You know, when we go into war, we really aren't. We aren't pleasant, which is probably why we had such a strong empire. And it was Pym who was actually her. I can't remember his first name. Francis Pym or something. He was the one who he actually saw the actual whole thing with China, and I think he had his eyes on the kind of divorce honeypot anyway. But he also realised what had happened in the Korean War. You know, in the Korean War, we'd seen the Americans enter into the Korean War just when the Koreans were on their knees in 1950, and kind of push the Koreans right back to almost annihilation. And then then of course the Americans entered, and they started started fighting what are now the North Koreans, the communist parties. And of course that's when the Chinese came in. And of course they mostly came in with just pitchforks. They literally sent men in with pitchforks to such a massive volume. They pushed the Americans back, and Americans lost 35,000 lives against men with pitchforks. They just couldn't believe it. Just that amount, you could send that amount of, and no one knows how many Chinese died. There's loads of different figures, but they won't ever release the real figures, so it's just a guesswork. But you can just imagine against what was, you know, modern warfare in that time, big machine guns, all the rest of it, everything, and they weren't a match against men with pitchforks. You know. So you can imagine that Francis Pym was kind of like, he was nervous about sort of going to war with China, especially after the amount of ships they just lost in the Falklands War, and just for what some said was a herd of sheep. Obviously, we have the stories of what's happening in the Antarctica now, and sort of like that play bigger part in that story, and there's lots of other stuff there that we are opening. Like we've just discovered that the seventh continent might actually be new, that we all thought went under the oceans, that it never went under the oceans, it just floated down to the right southern point of our world and has been happily there running things from afar whilst we've just been completely unaware. And that's what it's sounding like, isn't it? It's sounding like we've just discovered it's new, it's still here, and it always has been here, and we just missed it.
强硬的铁娘子携福克兰群岛的威风而来，她没有想到会碰到更硬的钢铁公司。她意识到
You know, Margaret Thatcher, she hated the EU. She didn't want to be part of it, and you know, she was the original Brexiteer. And I think it's surprising how many people hadn't realised that they were very, very strong Thatcherites all along with their kind of like Brexiteer kind of mentality. And just listen to this little bit of footage. This was I forget his name, the foreign minister at the time of that ended her career, Geoffrey Howe.
It was the late Lord Stockton, formerly Harold Macmillan, who first put the central point clearly. As long ago as 1962, he argued that we had to place and keep ourselves within the European community. He saw it as essential then, as it is today, not to cut ourselves off from the realities of power, not to retreat into a ghetto of sentimentality about our past, and so diminish our own control over our own destiny in the future.
His resignation speech is what destroyed Margaret Thatcher's career, and ultimately that's what ended it. And it's worth just listening. I'm just going to play a little excerpt from this, because if you're a Brexiteer, you want to hear this, because you've got a vote coming up.
The Prime Minister's perceived attitude towards Europe is running increasingly serious risks for the future of our nation. It risks minimising our influence and maximising our chances of being once again shut out. We've paid heavily in the past for late starts and squandered opportunities in Europe. We dare not let that happen again. If we detach ourselves completely, as a party or as a nation, from the middle ground of Europe, the effects will be incalculable and very hard ever to correct.
I think I'm going to leave it on this and let you decide on, because you've got a vote coming up, and I can't express to you, you know, if we leave Europe, if the EU collapses, there's a lot of superpower disappears off the map, and lots of little vulnerable countries are just sitting there, and you'll be forced to sign a lot of agreements that human rights will have little say. You really want to listen to this. This is from a Tory, one of the big thinking Tories of the time, supposedly, who put together the ERM. The ERM? I think the European Exchange Rate Mechanism. So I guess that is the ERM. Do you remember that? I can remember that, but I didn't have a clue what it all meant back in the day. But it was the way in which how the franc links up with the euro. It was a similar method that would have now enabled the pound, because the franc hasn't disappeared. The franc is still there. It's just levied up with and connected with the euro, and that would have been the same for the pound. And the European exchange rate mechanism was put together so Britain could enter the euro. And Margaret Thatcher scuttled that at the last moment and destroyed our chances of being part of that. And that's when this thing really started. And I think I personally believe that now is the time that we could really reverse all of that. We've got a snap election, because she hasn't done this election because she's really powerful at the moment. I believe she's put this election on because she doesn't want to be at the helm if the milk goes sour. If FREXIT doesn't happen, she does not want to be at the helm of Britain. And and then we're going to have to renegotiate entry, but that will be very, very difficult because you're going to have a lot of angry people that want UK independence, and what will likely come out of that, it's very difficult to say, but what could actually come out of all of this in this big split argument is everything that people were shouting out in the initial instance: total UK independence. That is, you know, no one knows how this is going to unfold. You know, like I say, we've just seen America deliver a state, you know, switch on or activate a state-of-the-art defense system in South Korea, and immediately the Russians have just, you know, activated their similar kind of like sophisticated missile defense system, the S-300s or whatever they're called, and probably S-400 or whatever they are. I don't know if there is an S-400. You know, I think there is, or something like that. I can remember hearing those terms battered around in when the missile defense shields were delivered to Iran when all this began. We're seeing the power that America and Britain are pushing up to claim the same economic hegemony that Margaret Thatcher talked about, that she always pushed for, that we won the war, that we deserve it, and everyone else should bow down. And we're seeing other superpowers coming forward. Yeah, it could collapse Europe, and Europe could fall away, and then we're forced into a massive great conflict, or it might not work. And so we come back to this image. If you've got a vote coming up, vote carefully. That's all I can tell you. These are very big times, and they're very real times, and at some point or other, each and every one of you is going to completely wake up to the fact that you are completely alive right now, and this is really happening, and you've been sitting on the fence, especially if you're not a non-voter and you've not been engaging in your rights to vote. You've been missing out on a lot of opportunity, and now this snap election is coming up, and what a difficult situation. What a difficult situation. Good luck. Take care. I'll get back to you at a later stage if I can ever work out how this is going to go. I think only time will tell, as they say. You know, time will tell. By this process, the same process that illuminates our atmosphere, and as a result, photon bombardment. Now, as the whole system is now moving away from the sun, like on the 29th of March 2016, where we suddenly had this 100-day view of it, and that was because I'm of an opinion that demonstrated that it was finally moving away from the sun. It was on its exit trajectory. We didn't quite know where Nemesis was at that stage. You know, we're still trying to work out. We had the entrance point of Nemesis, this dwarf planet, Planet X, whatever you want to call it, as, you know, 2010. It was, I can't remember the exact date, late February 2010, and then almost exactly 2 weeks later, early March, around about March the 11th, I'm not too sure, but 2011, we had Fukushima, and you know, that those were the two bump points which basically told us the speed, it was the overall speed that Nemesis was moving, and the fundamental trajectory that it was coming into the it was away from the sun. And as it, we've been seeing it, it's been popping into sight every 200 days, which, it takes 200 days to go round Nemesis. And so there's only one point in that cycle where it's far enough away from the sun that we get to see it every 200 days, especially as it's, what I'm talking about as we've been seeing it, as it's been going over the top of the sun from well, not really from our perspective, but from, if you were looking at the whole kind of the solar system and the ecliptic plane and all the planets going around the ecliptic plane, you can imagine it going over the top. And then you've got Nibiru sort of following it behind, but it's orbiting it, and obviously it's in its orbit around Nemesis. It goes to a point in each cycle where it's at the furthest point from our own sun, and at that point, that's when we, after sunset or before sunrise, when it's in the right position, we get to see the tail catching the sun's, basically illuminated by the sun's, by the photons hitting the tail of Nibiru. So that's why we don't see Nibiru so much. We more see the tail of Nibiru being illuminated by those. Hi there, Dave Dobbs here, aka David Field. So I thought I'd make a new video because we've got this 100-day point in Nibiru cycle coming up on, ironically, the 1st of May. Which is 100 days from basically the last sighting, which was the 21st of January 2017, this year. And so, I don't know if you remember, I think it was on the 29th of January, February, on 29th of March 2016, last year. Becky Lewis caught Nibiru 100 days exactly after her previous shot, which was on the 24th of December 2015, just the year before. So that was exactly 100 days, and I just made a video just before that time, and I thought I'd do the same now, just before that 100-day point, just to put it out there to say that you can expect to see that. I mean, I'm in preparation of this video now, and quite likely it could come, and it sounds like it has come a little bit earlier. And the reason for that is primarily because it's that much further coming into the sun, moving towards the sun on. We didn't know whether it was, like I say, whether it was going to sort of like how it was going to move through our solar system. All we knew was that all those 2012ers were absolutely right. This thing had arrived on the hour, really into the central hub of our solar system for 2012 sharp, and we've just been marvelling at all the various shots of it. But obviously, very, very difficult to see because you just can't see anything that close to the sun. What happens with the moon? It just disappears as it gets closer and closer to the sun. Anything else does the same. So we can't see it unless a part of it pops out far enough away from the sun, and that is. Obviously we do see, we've got tens of thousands of corroborated testimonies of, photos and videos of Nemesis, all of which, we just can't believe. Many of them from webcams and stuff like that, you can't fabricate, you can't make up, but we literally can't believe it. We all can't believe it. Obviously a lot of people have now caught onto this, but it's just too big and no one knows how to get around it. And then we have this sighting that comes in, like I say, every 200 days, which is now turned into an every 100-day occurrence. And whilst we were closest to it, in kind of like round about, well, the big bump point last year was on November the 22nd. So this was the first bump point of the two bump points I'm assuming that we're going to have as it goes out. November the 22nd, do you remember the big earthquake in New Zealand and the big earthquake in it was in Fukushima again, actually, ironically. And I mean, there's been huge, great tremors, but those two big earthquakes, you know, just from a seismic sort of activity perspective, I would say that marks that, because that was the biggest point in those earthquakes. I would say that marks the first bump point of its exit. So we know that it comes 1 year and 2 weeks later, because that demonstrates the kind of speed, the overall speed that Nemesis is moving. Although we also have to understand that this next bump point could be a little bit earlier than expected, because the escape velocity of the dwarf planet X system, whatever you want to call it, will have no doubt increased a little bit because of its kind of final movement into the sun and then being shot out the other side. I can imagine it's accelerating